evening.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi there.
Yes, I can do that, Ed.
Jade.
I'll take it. Both. This is the editor.
So I see some familiar names trickling in. In case you haven't seen Ed's note, we are just waiting till about 5 after to get started to see a few more people roll in. So thanks for waiting. Ed, as we give it one more minute, do you have a recommendation for the layout people should be viewing this in? I don't know if you saw the question in the chat.
So we'll be sharing a screen for the majority of the presentation. So I guess whatever suits your monitor or screen the best in terms of layouts. I think you can, in the top right, you have the view option, speaker view, gallery view, full screen. I guess whichever is easiest on your eyes is.
Yeah, so we will have a slide deck that we'll get started here in a second with. So it is 5 after. I think we'll jump in. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate you taking time out of your evening for us. I'm Stephanie Wolfgang. I'm the Master Plan Committee Chair with the Freedom Park Conservancy. I'm going to go ahead and introduce my colleagues from the Conservancy. We've got Harriet Lane, who's our board chair with us tonight. And then from our Master Plan Steering Committee, we've got Dave Blakely, Michael Reeves, and Nancy Boyd. And so what you're going to be seeing tonight is the development of our master plan that we've been working really hard towards. We've gotten a lot of great input from you all, both through these community engagement meetings, the website interface, and from our stakeholder meetings. And so you'll see this plan starting to come into fruition. And this is really going to be a guiding document for us as we move forward, not something set in stone, but something to help us craft projects as we move into the future. And with that, I will turn it over to our design partners at SWA.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let me share my screen. And then we'll get started. So we're very excited to present the master plan development today. The meeting will primarily focus on ideas that are starting to materialize in kind of form of visuals, perspective renderings, and also a plan of a park itself. We'll remind you what transpired since our public meeting number 2, what kind of progress we made since then by collecting your feedback, also meeting with stakeholders, and talk about next steps. But before we get into these items, I'm going to hand it over to Scott to remind us what this project means to us, to the Conservancy, and hopefully to the city.
Thank you, Natalia. Yeah, I'm gonna read something a little bit more formal here for a moment, but I wanted to take a moment and step back and take stock of what an incredible asset Freedom Park is to the city of Atlanta, to the communities who utilize it on a daily basis. The park is over 130 acres in size, stretches over 2.5 miles in length, and has a perimeter that stretches over 8 miles. It offers an invaluable reserve of open space for the city. And for the over 35,000 people living within a 10-minute walk of the park, it offers an incredibly convenient access to miles of trails and parkland close to the heart of downtown. From its far eastern tip along the banks of Lowwater Creek to its iconic downtown skyline overlook at the Jackson Street Bridge to the west, Freedom Park's green canopy and undulating topography offer an immersive network of open spaces stitched through some of the city's most vibrant and historical neighborhoods. Lesser known, perhaps, is that Freedom Park was born from struggle, a struggle to stop expansion of a planned state highway, slated to tear through an established urban community and stopped through the grassroots efforts of neighbors, advocates, and civic leaders. Freedom Park's unique outline, crisscrossed through and between 7 Atlanta neighborhoods, bears the scar of that struggle in what is now a linked network of green open space. But Freedom Park is more than just open space. Its land and adjacent neighborhoods offer a rich cultural history that remains relevant today, not only to its immediate community, but to the city of Atlanta and the nation as a whole. The park sits at the edge of the subcontinental divide. It was part of the setting for the Civil War's Battle of Atlanta. It sits adjacent to the homes of 2 Nobel Peace Prize recipients, Martin Luther King Jr. and Jimmy Carter, and the late Congressman John Lewis, a champion of empowering communities and a key figure in the realization of Freedom Park, is recognized through the dedication of both John Lewis Freedom Parkway and the plaza which bears his name, both within the park's boundaries. The park is also a key connector to some of the city's most important cultural and recreational assets. Connections can be found to the Atlanta Beltline, the Stone Mountain Trail, Olmsted Linear Parks, and to Fernbank Forest. It also extends to Little Five Points, the historic Fourth Ward, and of course to Ponce City Market. In order to leverage these assets and cultural narratives, the park must first address the limitations that it currently has. Pedestrian conflicts presented by an expansive road network, a lack of biodiversity within its landscape. It's a park that lacks a singular cohesive identity, a park with a collection of unique stories and assets, but that are hidden from view or buried within the cityscape that surrounds it. The Freedom Park Master Plan seeks to address both these fundamental design issues and uncover the untapped potential of the park. It seeks to address issues of public safety, legibility, and connectivity, while elevating park experiences for users and celebrating its diverse cultural offerings. Most importantly, though, the master plan seeks to reflect the insights and aspirations of you, the local community, as we seek to define the stewardship of the park over the coming decades. It should be built on its existing assets while protecting and preserving that which makes it one of Atlanta's, and in our estimation, one of the country's most significant parks.
Thank you, Scott. And with that, we're going to give you a quick public consultation update. On the schedule of the project, we are approximately 3/4 through it right now, looking to finalize master plan over the next month and a half, couple of months going forward. Over the month of November, we probably met with 20 different organizations, civic entities, institutions, nonprofits, to start circulating some of the ideas that are coming up, but also collecting their kind of more nuanced feedback and opinion about the role of the park as it relates to their organizations. As we are collecting this information, we are making sure to keep track of the fact that there is really big idea at hand here. But and for our team, the big idea is Freedom Park is very important, Atlanta's cultural transect. But also not forgetting about small opportunities and smaller ideas throughout the park, and that's what's really helpful. Through our engagement process, it's been helpful collecting that particular feedback from the community via website, individual conversations, and stakeholder meetings. So what is happening now is, as these ideas are getting systematized, vetted through individual meetings, a cohesive plan is starting to emerge. This is still a draft master plan, of course. Now that we have lines on the drawing, we can start scrutinizing where these lines should ideally go. But what we kind of wanted to talk about today, as far as the public consultation goes, is the direct impact your opinions and your feedback has on the development of the master plan. For example, the first conversation we had during our second meeting touched on the goals and the priorities for Freedom Park that in no particular order ranged from local to international. And with your help, we were able to vet which ones are the most important to the community to address in the park. And it's almost like starting to create this kind of pyramid of needs, and for the master plan. And I'm going to present how these particular, this hierarchy resulted in layering of a master plan, with this kind of a specific goal of the community. So number one important issue that came up is enhancing regional ecological value of the park. And here you see how, a variety of different tree canopy and gardens are starting to support that idea and augment what's already really important green asset in the city. The second layer in the pyramid of needs for the community is enhancing mobility and providing safe travel for bicyclists and pedestrians through the park. So here you can see how a network of paths is trying to emerge as a secondary network of paths to support what's already there. The third important layer that will inform ideas in the master plan is positioning the park as a unique international art space. It has a modest collection of public art right now, but over time, it can really start presenting a cohesive experience through art walks and experiencing art programming, maybe through temporary art, performance art, in addition to permanent installations. So that's something we're actively pursuing in the master plan, identifying those locations and spots. The next layer that's important is highlighting local, national, international civic role of the park. And for us, it not only translates into really embracing the influence of John Lewis and Jimmy Carter and Martin Luther King Jr. Through their kind of particular districts and precincts of the park, but directly expressing kind of the need and the opportunity for public assembly in kind of gathering places throughout the park. And this is where you see that can occur at John Lewis Plaza, at King Square, at Popin Terrace, what we call Freedom Commons. It's large moorland lawn, and also Poplar Circle in Inman Park. The next layer of the master plan deals with supporting adjacent neighborhood vitality, and it's almost creating a conduit system through and around the park that, it's like a blood supply of people circulating that not only circulating through the park, but also through the neighborhood, supporting local businesses, local restaurants, and vice versa, coming into the park and enjoying what it has to offer. The next layer is elevating national significance of Atlanta's Freedom Park, and for us it means it's unusual shape, but I think once people start recognizing it, it'll become quite iconic, not just in Atlanta, but also nationally. Finally, increasing economic viability of the park, it's very much a practical consideration. Maintenance issues are a concern. And in order for us to provide that maintenance for all of the exciting projects that we'll be talking about today, we really need to consider how people can start developing ownership of the park by understanding its boundaries, by understanding experience of arrival, valuing that experience, and really wanting to bring their family to the park and kind of identify it as a unique offering in the city vis-a-vis other large regional parks. The second conversation that we had with you at the second meeting dealt with programming. And programming is a jargon word, for planning urban open spaces, but really what it means is the type of things we can do in the park, the type of activities we can enjoy in the park. And currently, park is very passive. It has wonderful undulating landscape and trails. But for especially some people, especially young families, it may be not enough. If you want to do a staycation in the park or spend an afternoon. So what you see here is kind of a sum total result of feedback on the range of kind of heavily to lightly programmed activities. And by heavily to lightly, we really mean the amount of infrastructure that's required to be introduced to support these activities. For example, new play equipment versus bringing the ball, into playing kickball with your own equipment, that kind of thing. So really the result here is 50-50 split in the community. A lot of people want to keep it really passive, really relaxing, which is absolutely we're hearing that, but also thinking how we can enhance what's already there and making it a little bit more exciting. Another opportunity to give us feedback on programming was via kind of a live interactive map that everybody had a chance to provide their specific ideas dealing with the type of activities that can happen in the park, dealing with culture, art, ecology, recreation. And so what we've done, we've taken the existing programming of the park and augmented it with these ideas provided by you, but also through our internal analysis, we kind of developed this extensive list of programming that fully reflects that philosophy of enhancing what's here, building on what's already beautiful and functioning well, but also providing new opportunities for cultural exposure, education, kind of environmental education, but also play and recreation as well.
Okay, with that, I'm gonna walk through the master plan, and we're gonna go from east to west, which is completely arbitrary. We could go in any direction, but I think we want to stick within a transect that Natalia was mentioning earlier. So we're gonna start here on the east, and this area we've called this the East Wing, and it roughly stretches from Ponce de Leon through the adjacent to the Paideia School and all the way over to the intersection with Moreland. And we're going to start here closer to the Paideia School. And actually what you have to recognize in this is at the center of this park area here, where you can see this little blue stream through, that's actually not part of Freedom Park. That's land owned by the Paideia School, but they have a master plan. We for all of our stakeholder meetings, we had pretty in-depth discussions, and they have very interested in developing a very light touch trail system through there that would be focused on education and really immersion in this really unique, low forested riparian landscape that's very specific to this site. We have the historic bridge by Ponce de Leon, which has these beautiful arches. It's kind of this discovered space that could be restored somewhat. Maybe even people could occupy it for small events or otherwise associated with children's education. But really what this is about is about formalizing this gateway and making more convenient access from this far eastern end of the park. This is the part that extends off into nearby Fernbank Forest and the Olmsted Linear Parks. So this is not to mention the trail that continues on to Stone Mountain. So this is an important sort of reference point on the park, obviously. And so this trail system, which we have shown as the white line going through here, that's the primary hike and bike trail, is also augmented by these secondary trails that move through this delicate forest and help provide legibility through these increased sort of size of gateways at key points and so forth as references. So if you looked at an image of what that might look like, this is again down in the lower portions of near this ravine. You see this little waterway coming through. Again, trail systems, maybe they're boardwalks or metal boardwalks or wood boardwalks that delicately go through this space. Maybe the garden plantings are kept up in a way that they're making highly legible for people visiting for the first time. There's interpretive elements within this area as well. As we move out of that space, we come to the intersection at North Ave and Candler Park, and we move into what's essentially the area of the Mary Lynn School. And this is also a significant location just by nature of the amount of activity that's adjacent to it. The road crossing there needs to be probably clarified, so that crossing becomes an important factor in how we sort of identify that. We have this beautiful topography that really defines this hill on which the Mary Lynn School is set, and then the trail that sits down lower between this bank of forests. And so we thought that was a wonderful opportunity to introduce butterfly habitat or wildflower meadows that would support this diversification of ecology, kind of in support of this more natural portion of the park. And then as that carries you through the site, brings you along into some of the existing trail systems that have these rooms where art is currently located, and we think is a big part of this sort of framework of art programming that can be extended throughout the park in a more sort of curated manner. So those spaces, in a lot of ways, it's again a light touch. We keep them where they generally are, but we reinforce the edges of those landscapes, whether it be through topography or planting, to really amplify and accentuate the sense of enclosure. And if we go a little bit further, we come to the edge of the existing city park here with the basketball courts and tennis courts along Euclid Avenue. And there's a little waterway that comes through there. There's not currently a trail that gets to those. You have to kind of walk through the grass. So very simply providing a formal trail that brings access. We can work with the city in developing that and kind of making that feel like maybe even a part of this park altogether, just given by its proximity. But we can also find opportunities. There's a little drainage channel, actually a creek that runs by the back below these tennis courts that we could open up and expose and to create this beautiful little woodland wet, low meadow garden space. And then there's a little bridge that goes around it. So again, finding opportunities like that to enhance ecology, offer sort of interpretive elements is an important sort of just general idea as we move through the park. So this image here would show that intersection as you're moving into the Mary Lynn site. And you can see the wildflower meadow as it extends off to the distance. And these gateways become really important elements. This is where we gather up a little bit more space than currently there. So if you're on a bike or you're a pedestrian, you can stop, pause, you can find the directions of where you're going. And we would integrate this sort of language that repeats itself throughout the park. So you always kind of know where you are. You always know you're at an important space. And then there might be signage that also points to places that are outside of Freedom Park. So again, we're beginning that dialogue between the assets of what's in the park paired with the assets that are outside of the park. And there may be additional interpretive elements that we can integrate into the plaza space, whether it be poetry or imagery, maybe in simple ways, maybe it's embedded in the paving. But in general, we want these pieces to be well crafted and be sort of this permanent fixture and really sort of set the tone for your experience as you move through the park. Moving into the park, you can see these hills. The Mary Lynn School would be off at the top of the hill to the left of the image. And so these meadows that sort of undulate through the space, you could introduce new opportunities that aren't currently exist there. Maybe there's a slide that's incorporated down the hill so that kids who are associated with the school could really, or anybody really, any adults even, could utilize this slide and really kind of feel the topography and immerse themselves in the space in a fun way. Maybe there's other elements, educational, nature-based elements, animal architecture and birdhouses, and so forth as you move through this sort of network of hills and valleys. And then as you pass into the other stretches of Freedom Park, of this segment of Freedom Park, there are quieter opportunities, maybe some that are a little bit more ephemeral. We could have these side, you have the main bikeway, maybe there's a side pathway that is embedded in the concrete as bioluminescent elements that absorb the sunlight during the day, and then at nighttime reveal this beautiful nighttime moonwalk, essentially, that glows at dusk and at night. And we can do that in this part of the park because we don't have as much ambient light, and so those kind of natural cycles work. And that idea of darkness is something that we should embrace. Certain parts of the park, as we'll talk about, are much more active and have loops and will be used more at nighttime. This is one that's maybe it's more quieter and given a little bit more deference to nature and the systems within it. And then really thinking about how these spaces work in conjunction with these trail systems to really frame art opportunities that are also embedded in this sequence. As we move a little bit closer towards Moreland, we're going to start getting into a little bit more urban part of the park, but we're in this beautiful bucolic rolling landscape with the great big green hill that sits just adjacent to Moreland. On your way through there, you pass through a few more of these little rooms that are developed. And you can see we've added a lot more path systems. We have the primary hike and bike trail, but we think it's important to offer secondary paths, walking paths, to recognize that there's a difference between going for a run and a bike. And sometimes you just want to go for a walk, or sometimes you might want to stop and pause. And so we want to recognize that speed differential and offer the infrastructure to allow for people to experience this park at different speeds, but also utilize that as an opportunity to sort of define these new zones of landscape as they may be developed. There's been some efforts already in place here to do stormwater infrastructure that's folded very quietly into the park. We think that could be accentuated and even expanded upon to address other drainage issues, such as at the south area near these homes where we know there's some flooding concerns. And these areas, every time we tackle that, we think of it as an opportunity to potentially overlay that with ideas about increasing habitat, increasing education about landscapes, and just generally making these beautiful sort of garden settings that be a beautiful passive experience as you move through this part of the park. You'll also notice that we've introduced a wider trail on the south side that essentially creates this loop around the hill that's sort of in the center left of the screen. And that is paired with another idea, which is the crossing at Moreland Avenue. Now, that is an intersection that in our discussions with the public has certainly an important one. It's a busy intersection. It doesn't always feel safe to cross. There are kids who are trying to get to school. They might be more apt to ride their bike or walk if there was a safer way to get across. So improving the intersection is sort of a high priority of the project. How we do that? Well, there's two different ways we can approach it. At the ground level, at the intersection level, providing a little more generous plaza spaces for people to queue up and move through with bikes and other larger groups of people, working with the medians to create more islands of refuge, and generally privileging pedestrians at the ground level at the crossing. But there's also another idea that was put forth many years ago, this idea of doing a bridge over moorland. And we think that that idea has merit in the sense that it really establishes this privileged idea that you can ride a bike or you can walk from one end of Freedom Park, potentially, if we line up everything just right, all the way to the other without actually even having to stop for a car, or at least certainly at this point. And that's a big statement to make. There's the challenges with that, of course, with how do you do a bridge in close to a residential community in a beautiful bucolic park that doesn't feel out of place and doesn't contradict what the experiences seem to be. And we think that because of the topography that's located here, there is a way you can integrate the landing of the bridge on its east side into the hill to limit its size, as well as on the west side, we have enough room, we think, to build up a little bit of topography and plant trees, framing it on either side. So the bridge really appears sort of out of this veil of trees across the road and then back into another veil of trees. We'll see an image of that in just a moment, but this image here really kind of captures what we think is so magical about this portion of the park, this undulating, open, bucolic landscape that's suitable for all sorts of quiet events. The idea that land art can be sculpted in here, as well as more formal art programs, whether it be rotational art or permanent pieces that get added to the park's collection. And here we see the moorland crossing. And again, at the ground plane, we're showing much wider and more generous pedestrian crossings with the medians that are developed to help protect pedestrians. Of course, the plaza on the opposite end where there could be signage and gathering spaces, and then the rolling hill off to the distance. And on the right of the screen, you'll notice this narrow pedestrian bridge that also could be integrated and extend across. And I think the design of that becomes a very important endeavor, really, not just to address issues such as the power lines that exist there and how we do that, but also how do we leverage sort of the latest technologies in construction to reduce the scale of this bridge? What kind of colors and materials do we choose for it in a way that so it becomes very deferential to this otherwise beautiful landscape that we're working around and through? But of course, it doesn't need to be there necessarily either. There's a solution also that works without it. So the crossing here is shown obviously without the bridge, similar features, and you can see that, yeah, there's an improvement there as well. So both ways, and I think that's something that the Conservancy will continue to study and will be an important objective moving forward. So now we're going to jump to the south, we call the south wing. So here we are at DeKalb Avenue at the gateway, the south gateway to the park at the MARTA train station. This is in a really important spot. We have a bridge that actually connects across DeKalb to a whole entire community. So this is their access point into the park. If you were a visitor to Atlanta, this might be the way you come to the park, by taking the train for the very first time. So we think there's a lot of opportunity, and this is an important sort of gateway moment. Now, the parking lot in the existing situation is not that great. Sort of a parking lot that's been shifted and adjusted over time. There's been a little striped location where you can walk through, and it comes kind of this very tight, sort of hidden juncture, almost like a secret entry into the park. We feel like this should become formalized into sort of a more formal entrance point in the park. We'll show images of that into a moment. And that idea extends further as we zoom in and we think about the sight lines of where you're going. And we want to open up maybe the trees a little bit so you can actually see where you're going, so it feels very safe entering this park, and that the lines of sight take you to the heart of this incredibly important space within the Inman Park portion of Freedom Park. We have the poplar circle, which is associated with some of the art events or the Inman Park events that takes place. We have this beautiful playground nestled in the trees on the top of a hill. And then we have this knoll here adjacent to the parking lot, this little hill that's this wonderful sort of viewing spot. But we also have things like this desire line, this pathway, this cow path that's been developed as people get off the train and want to take a shortcut to get to Little Five Points and other parts of the neighborhood. So we think there's opportunities to formalize that again with these side paths. Maybe there's a chain of gardens we can develop within under the trees of this network, and maybe we can do things to enhance the playground that reinforce its position, open up its visibility, and really kind of make this a really rich and natural place. So if you enter into the park, this might be what you see. Signage becomes really important. Of course, we have the buses and we have all the cars associated with the MARTA station just off the screen to our left. But we've gone ahead and we've had discussions with MARTA about sort of cooperating. This is actually not Freedom Park land, we should remember, but it is, and MARTA would agree. There's a shared goal in trying to making this a really wonderful entrance point into the park. So we took the liberty of shuffling their parking around a little bit to open up a nice, generous pathway that extends into the park, and then potentially building a beautiful little pavilion or shelter that can also function as signage to the park, but also offer other opportunities. Maybe there's a small restrooms or museum in there that displays some of the collections of the history of Freedom Park's very unique history. And maybe that also extends into an interpretive walk that extends along this whole sort of threshold into the park. So as you're entering to Freedom Park, you're learning a lot about a lot of the narratives that we find so fascinating about this park, which we think are really relevant, not just to the local community, but also potentially even nationally as a reference point. If you move a little bit closer in, you'll start to see how that sort of the scale of that space as it would compare right now, which is sort of you're hemmed in by berms and chain link fences. So opening that up and really sort of creating a shared experience with the MARTA parking lot, which we don't think is a bad thing. Maybe there's a grid of an orchard of trees that gets embedded within that parking area. So it feels like a very much a park-like setting. And you can see this interpretive wall that might begin to tell this complicated and rich story as you kind of transition into the gateway of the park further beyond. And then once you get into the park, we talked about the play area. You know, there's opportunities to take things that are embedded in the park and steer them towards the narratives that we're talking about. We think is a unique and interesting opportunity. The park also has this. It's an art park. So when we think of infrastructure within the park, whether it be play or trails or benches or anything, we can always choose to overlay that as opportunistically in this interpretive way, which I think really makes a much richer experience. Here in this portion of the park, we have the old historic steps that led to the homes that were now removed. We are in this deep forest with these tall canopy of trees, and we think you could take something like a playground and you could you could work with that narrative, and maybe you sort of begin to start celebrating the idea of homes and neighborhood and community. But maybe you do it in a forest setting, so maybe they become tree houses, and you're also celebrating the unique sort of character of this landscape as you move through it. As we move a little bit further, we cross Euclid Avenue. Again, another crossing point. These smaller gateways become really important. And here's an area where we had a much lighter touch. We moved through on the existing trail system, but we introduced these secondary side paths that help reinforce and define this beautiful undulating landscape that you descend down into as you move towards the Carter Center. And so, again, we want to preserve the flexibility and the character and certainly the trees, the beautiful trees that occupy these areas, but work the edges and opportunistically reinforce the planting to, again, shape these rooms so that you have a clearer sense of enclosure, open up sort of soft programming opportunities, and maybe even overlay that with another theme. Maybe there's a series of flowering trees and woodland shrubs that bloom at certain times to create this seasonal overlay to this experience. So when you come back here, whether it be the spring or the fall, it sort of it presents itself differently each time. And then we move to the center of the park. So we've given proper names to a lot of these places, and that's not our job to give proper names. That's going to be the job of the Conservancy and the public, but it's helpful for us at this point. So if we're going to call this Freedom Park Central, which really is the area that defined around the Carter Presidential Center. And so you can see that we've rendered the Carter Presidential Center as part of the park. Obviously, it's not part of the park, But we do think they are they have a very much an aligned sort of mission, and they also are an important partner, both now and in the future for the park. And there's a lot of goals that we both share. They are looking to get more convenient foot traffic to come and visit the Carter Center and see what their offerings are. The Conservancy, and I'm sorry, the general public, I should say, wants to get to the Carter Center, and it's hard because we have roads on all sides of it, and there's the only places you can cross currently are these areas we've highlighted in yellow, and really you're just running across the street because there's no official way. The cars are not do not have to stop for you at those locations. So that's a number one priorities. How do we increase that? Well, the first thing you could do, you increase safety. So the first thing we could do is introduce, whether it be stop signs or pedestrian activated traffic signals, we call hawk signals. Where you press a button and a light comes on, stops cars for you to safely cross into to the Carter Center. And those could happen at these points marked in yellow. On the north side, we can be opportunistic, where there's this little ravine. We can build a pedestrian bridge that actually gets you from the Ponte Highlands side of the park into Freedom Park, the Carter Center, and at a location that they sort of aligns with how they want visitors to come and visit the park. And in the process, open up what they have to offer in this beautiful landscape that they will be developing over time as well. There's some other key moves around here as well. Again, you'll see some introduction of some of these smaller footpaths. I think probably more importantly, from the corner of Ralph McGill, we've tucked in a little pathway that gets basically in the sliver of land between John Lewis Parkway and the private properties that are adjacent to it, down to connect to the Beltline. So again, connecting to the Beltline is an important asset. Right now, there's really only one clear way to do it here on the southeast corner. And we're going to introduce new opportunities to really formalize that relationship between what is also another incredible sort of open space asset, linking these things together. And then, of course, at the intersections at Ralph McGill, you'll see it. Also at North Highland, these sort of larger plaza areas, similar to the image that we showed earlier. Maybe these are bigger intersections. Maybe these plazas get a little bit bigger, but serving the same thing: wayfinding, gateway, a point of stopping and figuring out where you're going, and generally recognizing these as major entry points into the Freedom Park
and also
system.
Safe refuge for pedestrians too.
That's right, safe refuge. Now, there's another overlay to this, and this is where we get a little bit more ambitious, but we think this has potential, at least as something to study. And that is, we could look at potentially taking the south side, what's called East Freedom Parkway, which is now shown in white, which used to be shown as gray because that is a road. And we could decommission that as a road and turn it into a hike and bike trail, make it formally part of the hike and bike trail system of Freedom Park. And it's important to note that would not necessarily require rebuilding the road. You can literally, that road's already relatively narrow. It's a single lane road. We could simply work with the curbs and adjust just the connection points to the road system to decouple it and then reconnect it to the bike system. And then now suddenly you have this beautiful connected loop all the way around the Carter Presidential Center. And we think that's really important for legibility. It's also a great opportunity if you want to go for a run. You can have this sort of loop system and not a there and back sort of situation, which you currently have on much of the trail system at Freedom Park. So that's a big idea that could open up parkland and certainly change the experience, particularly as it relates to connectivity to the Carter Center. Now, we wouldn't necessarily have to rely so much on these awkward crossings in mid-block, so to speak, and we could really have people flow into the park, particularly from the south side. And of course, this would also be paired with a lot of study and work that the Carter Center would have to do to resolve their circulation. So we think there's ways to do it, but that's something that we're just sort of scratching the surface on. So this just gives you an idea about how much land, if you on the south side of the Carter Presidential Center, if you took that road or you decommissioned that road and you open up this land, suddenly it's all pedestrianized. There's no vehicles. It's much quieter. You have views to downtown, and you can really start to leverage this topography and this interesting undulating landscape that moves through here. It opens up interesting new places. This high point, right? The Beltline is right beneath the road, right in front of you, and you have this crazy slope that you can slide down if you want to go there right now. But But maybe we create this beautiful little opportunistic overlook that has this nice views to downtown. Maybe there's a running hill where you can run up to it, and as part of this sort of more intense exercise loop. There's a lot of different ways, a lot of different opportunities that would get presented with doing that. Now we're going to move to the northern portion now. This is what we call the North Wing, basically from through Ponce Highlands, from Ponce de Leon Avenue down to the Carter Presidential Center. And this portion of the park has essentially three major moves that we want to talk about. The first is what we think is one of the most important places in the park, and that's John Lewis Plaza. Certainly the legacy or his legacy is incredibly important, both within the city, to Freedom Park, but also to the entire country for innumerable reasons. And there is a plaza there, and there is the beautiful Thornton Dial sculpture in honor of him. But we feel like that could be really, that narrative could be expanded on to formalize that plaza as really a civic gathering place. If the spirit of John Lewis was one about sort of civic discourse and really enabling communities to take action, or at least have conversations, maybe this is a place where we can start to instill some of those values. Maybe we can be opportunistic with the landscape and take this valley that sort of sits adjacent to that space and create this beautiful pond, this lake, Lake Lewis, we can call it, that sits adjacent to that plaza space. And then sits, as the grade slopes back up, you have this beautiful bowl, this hill, this green hill that sits opposite that could also function along with those same spaces. There could be the little dead end street that occupies the right side, could be a little home for more art. And of course, the plantings along John Lewis Parkway, and this will be a theme that we'll see elsewhere in the park as well. Trees Atlanta is interested in participating in this, could be enhanced in a way that really celebrates his legacy in seasonality of ornamental native trees that really get planted all along the entire stretch of that John Lewis Parkway. But on the left side or the west side of John Lewis Parkway, there's a smaller, but we think equally interesting opportunity, and that's this little ravine trail. It's this portion of land that dives down deep within these big tall trees down there. We think we might be a way to thread a trail down through there and just provide a really unique offering for how you circulate through the park. Not everybody has to always be on the big hike and bike trail. Maybe you just want to take a quiet walk through a garden, through a woodland garden. And here's another little opportunity where you can do that. That also offers better connectivity to Bonaventure and some of the other adjacent areas to the west. So we think that's important as well. And here you can begin to see that idea of John Lewis Plaza, maybe a little bit more hardscape, a little more plaza, the Thornton Dial sculpture there, some civic gathering spaces, and you can see it edging up against the pond adjacent to it. That pond itself could be quite beautiful, and as we move further down the pond, it has an opportunity to get a little bit more natural and wild. We can plant seasonal trees, maybe it's cypress trees or something that's really offers you a much more immersive experience into an open body of water, something that Freedom Park doesn't currently have formally. And maybe there's some boardwalks and things within that area. So again, a really just nice sort of pairing of opportunities that presented by what's already there and by the topography. If we move a little bit further south, south of North Ave, and then to the stretch that connects back to Freedom Parkway, we have the existing play area and community gardens and the trail system that moves through there. And we think this trail system could just be slightly realigned in a few key areas, and the secondary walk system paired with that to really, again, more clearly define these functional components and separate them. So that helps with maintenance, it also helps with legibility. But it also creates new spaces that if you pair that with how you manage the landscape, whether it be about trees, how you plant new trees, you can start to create some more sort of volumes of space that don't have a specific program necessarily. They could house art. They could be a place where you have a yoga class or something. I mean, there's anything. And I think it's important to allow these sort of unscripted spaces to exist within the park, because that's where the community really comes in to sort of define the experiences. And then you can see that pairs up with the bridge that we were talking about before to the Carter Center. And then of course on the west side, the continuation of that ridge trail, in this case, not so much a ravine, but continuing along, up some hills and back down, but looking for opportunities again with these secondary paths to create volumes of space at key locations, whether it be near intersections or otherwise for creating a nice seating area, or a place for art. Again, this is Atlanta's art park. So here you see an image of what maybe that bridge to the Carter Center might look like, with the road traveling underneath it. And again, it's nestled within the woods. There's these beautiful pine trees that proliferate around this portion of the park, creating a really unique landscape character that we would like turn up the volume on, so to speak, and really kind of make a unique portion of the park. And the last area we're going to talk about is what we call the West Wing. This is the area from the Carter Center extending all the way to Jackson Street Bridge on the far western side. Now, this first leg of that is, again, just where we were before. The belt line is running underneath John Lewis Parkway. You can see the ice bridge with a convenient logo, which I'll talk about in a second, on it. But that juncture of these two park systems, these linear park system with Freedom Park system, we think that we could do these beautiful little plazas that what we call handshake plazas, when two parks come together and meet. And that's just another great opportunity to have an orientation point for signage, for wayfinding. Maybe you can pump up the air in your tires, or meet somebody who's going to go with you on your way in either direction. But again, we feel very strongly that we need to think of the directionality of this park as both extending internally as well as extending externally, and really leveraging all these adjacencies. The ice bridge, you can't ignore it. It's enormous. It sits right there. We think it's a great opportunity to think about how that could be incorporated with an art program, whether it be on the sides. Maybe we paint something great on the roof of it, like we're seeing here, and you can see it as you fly into Atlanta, building awareness of the park. Or maybe it's some other art piece. Maybe we even can develop a ramp and a stair that takes you up to the top of it. We're still working on that idea. Maybe there's some structural limitations perhaps, but we think that these kind of opportunities are important and ones that we should really explore and jump on when available to sort of add layers to what this park experiences can be. As you move further to the west, you'll see the plantings along John Lewis Parkway extend with the flowering trees. There's some trail systems that don't currently exist that we're showing, one of which connects about midway on this image to an existing trail system. There's a little pedestrian bridge crossing that you'll see perpendicular to John Lewis Parkway that pairs up with a small path system that kind of stops. We think we can extend it carefully, and that would extend down all the way to the belt line, again on the north side. And then the same thing on the south side, where the path currently kind of stops. We would be able to extend it and drop it into the belt line as well. Other areas, like at that pedestrian bridge, for example, if the topography allows, we can open it up and create more of these little nodes, these little spaces where you can stop and you can incorporate art or other components. And then of course we have the intersection of Highland and Randolph, which is an incredibly important intersection for this community. It offers kind of two things. One is that it's obviously this conduit for commerce and just community connectivity, and then art. If you've crossed there, art is a big part of how that bridge functions. But it's also thinking about how John Lewis Parkway is utilized. Maybe it's being utilized for parades and so forth. So this becomes a place where you can perch and sort of participate in those sort of activities from different perspectives. And we're always looking for new perspectives as we move through this park, high and low, and using the landscape and the topography and the existing infrastructure to find those opportunities. So this is an image of what maybe like one of these handshake plazas, as we called it, at the belt line. We're down at the belt line looking back up to John Lewis Parkway, or Freedom Park rather, and the ice bridge is shown there. The art potentially being incorporated along its facade, and just generally a great little sort of urban interface plaza at this juncture between these two great park systems. If we go up to the intersection at Randolph and Highland, we have the 54 columns sculpture, which occupies a pretty sizable piece of land, but it's tucked behind these trees and it's hard to get to. So we think exposing that a little bit more, increasing connectivity to it. Maybe there's a little plaza in its foreground, so you don't have to walk up a muddy hill like you currently do to get in there, would help elevate that park experience. But then really thinking about how we can opportunistically find places within the public right of way to expand sort of pedestrian activity, and really think about how art, which is a big component on these bridge systems are currently, can be expanded into the into the landscape in new ways. So maybe there's artful crosswalks as part of the program. Maybe there's art that gets incorporated at this corner. But probably more importantly here, we've this area sort of in dark gray where we have the photographer standing. We could build out, where that land doesn't actually even currently exist, we could build out a little, essentially a balcony, a deck, or what we call a belvedere, that gives you views out onto Freedom Parkway, again, to see the parades or to see the flowering trees or to catch a photograph. And just generally a people place within which otherwise can be a pretty busy sort of traffic intersection. And then of course we have John Lewis Freedom Parkway itself and the idea of how we think about vegetation as a vehicle to help tell narratives, whether it be through flowering trees or ground plan vegetation. And I should mention that GDOT is actually currently actively designing and pursuing a portion, a pretty wide median portion. I'll show you in a moment. Well, I'll show you right now. Right here in the middle, where they are designing a garden space within the median that is in dedication to John Lewis and incorporates actually some interesting narratives. And so we want to, that's why we want to build off of those ideas and extend it all the way up along the formal extent of John Lewis Freedom Parkway. But there's other opportunities, and this is the furthest western portion of the park. We have the existing dog park, incredible community asset. Dog parks are hard to build for all sorts of reasons. So when you have them, you got to make the best use of them you can. And that use is limited right now because the intersection of Boulevard and John Lewis Parkway is incredibly busy. It's a hard place to cross. It's not because it's not signalized, but just because as a pedestrian, you feel like you're a target for many cars that are lined up as they're moving along, very loud. So the idea of building sort of a expanded plaza, again, one of these gateway moments, maybe there's signage incorporated in the walls that really welcome you to Freedom Park more formally, but also provide opportunities to formalize entrances into the dog park, for example. We could have a little staircase that comes down, or maybe an accessible entrance off of Boulevard in the north corner of the park. And then thinking about how that relates also to sort of the higher density residential that sits across the street on the northwest corner of the intersection. We have this mixed use development that's on the southwest corner, southeast corner. There's a coffee shop there that's quite popular, and the trail system that interfaces with that. And then of course we have the, on the furthest portion to the west, we have was really a little quiet street here that also is the terminus to the pedestrian path that takes you all the way down to the King Center. Incredibly important cultural landmark for our country, let alone for the community.
It's a national park.
It's a national, well, yeah, it extends, right, that's right, it's a national park and extends into that whole system. So we think we have to sort of recognize that and leverage that for both, and it works both ways, for both the park's benefit as well as for the national parks mission and the King Center's mission. And so in doing so, we want to kind of think about how programmatically we can do something to be complementary to what that's about. And so we think about this street and how that could be reimagined, still functioning as a street, but maybe set up so that it can be closed off for special events, and it becomes this community gathering space right at a very important juncture of the park, in an area that's also well buffered from John Lewis Parkway. And then also it takes you all the way to the Jackson Street Bridge, which is also an important landmark within the city, because that's the place where you go to get your selfie or take the photograph of the downtown skyline, particularly at sunset. But if you do it today, you might step off the curb and get hit by a car. So one of the city is actually currently looking at is realigning the traffic lanes and the bike lanes to optimize them to gain a little bit more pedestrian space along that sidewalk portion, thinking about potentially even putting traffic barriers to help make that a much safer place to have that activity. And then again, one other space that I passed over here, right above where it says John Wesley Dobbs Avenue, which is also across from Howard Middle School, is another wonderful parklet or small park space that currently has this lawn, and it actually has this beautiful sculpture that's currently been displayed there. We think this is another great opportunity to create another gateway for the community into Freedom Park, formalize that gateway. There's currently a trail there, but thinking about how it's used and who's using it. we have this middle school across the street. Is there some role for that plaza to be integrated with the needs of that community, as well as overlaying that with this art idea? And so here's an image of how a place like that might exist, with this sort of beautiful plaza paving. Maybe there's some fun way of integrating seating that helps reinforce the formality of the park, but in a way that's also engaging for kids to kind of get out their middle school energy as they sit and interact within this space. And then do it in a way that can be used for school groups, to teachers, to allow them to kind of corral kids and capture their attention, or just to use casually on a quiet, weekend morning. And then that plaza, that streetscape, we've taken the liberty of giving it another formal name. We're calling it King Square, but the idea is really there's this beautiful knoll of grass and the existing trail that comes through. Maybe we can rethink how with the park that portion is paved. We can think about some of the infrastructure. Maybe there's even electrical hookups for food trucks or other types of event sort of infrastructure. So the community can use this as a celebratory place for the park, as well as a sort of a gateway and plaza that functions. And then thinking about how that function extends into these sort of transformative points. Maybe there's infrastructure for nighttime events or lights and so forth. So again, a neat opportunity at a really important portion of the park with a lot of symbiotic sort of relationships. And then finally, just that what we were talking about before about that space along Jackson Street Bridge with the beautiful views to downtown. And of course, in this image, the King Square area off to your left side of the screen, and the John Lewis flowering trees planted up and down the way. So, and I think that really, this whole park, really, the idea of is that it doesn't really even stop there. It extends. We want the idea, whether it be part of forming the park or otherwise, to extend that connection all the way into downtown and really use the park as an opportunity to really bridge all these incredible assets that the city of Atlanta has. With that, I'll pass it back to Natalia.
Thank you, Scott. Okay. So speaking about next steps of our master planning process, as you can see, there are dozens of ideas, big and small. It's a bit overwhelming, where do you even start thinking about implementation of these ideas? So the way we are thinking about it is starting to kind of identify what we call priority projects, but it's not our priority because we like them the most. We believe that some of these projects have true momentum for implementation. And so what we will be focusing on between now and, let's say February, is developing this prioritization list with your help, with community help. We'll be posting materials about this potential project list on the website for you to provide feedback on perhaps top 3 or top 5 favorite ideas that you see in the plan. But we are also thinking opportunistically about implementation in terms of partnerships that may already exist. Like, for example, the planting program may rely on Trees Atlanta, but Trees Atlanta is already interested in that particular idea to commemorate the life of John Lewis. So that is something that we need to, probably address right away. There is, a variety, GDOT, same thing. But there is a variety of kind of smaller projects that may really open up a world. If you can connect to Beltline through a link that didn't exist before and save you, 15 minutes of circulation, that probably should be done sooner rather than later. And then on par with that, we have kind of the larger vision, longer term priority projects but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to happen later on. Again, looking at potential partnerships and potential interest in the community. We're looking at, King Square, the pedestrian plaza at Boulevard. We're looking at Punchy Highland pedestrian bridge, visitor experience at Marta. All of these projects may have legs sooner rather than later. So basically, the next stage of the project is going through research conversations about implementation, understanding potential partnerships associated with all of these projects, and basically developing kind of a phasing framework of how some of this vision can start coming to life. So with that, I think we're finished, and I will hand it over back to Ed.
Yes, thank you both for the presentation. We'll kind of move into question and answers. I've been trying to consolidate things from the chat, and there's a couple questions in the Q&A box. I guess we can start with this idea of a skate park that a lot of people have at this meeting and also on our interactive map have made comments kind of arguing for the idea of a skating space that's geared towards beginners that could be supplemented by some creative art ideas. So would this, if SWA wants to speak to this, would this be something that would be seriously considered?
I'll speak to that real quickly. I think, yes, that is something we remember that comment quite well. And actually, we've looked at the site. Some of that will depend upon these bigger moves. I'll give you an example. If the road moved along the south side of the Carter Center, that would open up some land where something like that could be considered. We think that those kind of opportunities are really wonderful. There's a lot of different ways, manifestations they can take. It's really, I think that sometimes you want those things to be offline from the main sort of course of traffic, both for the skaters' benefit, but also for the kind of passers-by benefit. We have a lot of topography, so that's a little bit of a challenge. But again, if that road moves, we'll have a little bit of opportunity to regrade things and potentially create that sort of a loop. And the next question on that, which I think is a more nuanced question, which is where I think as these ideas get tested moving forward, we'd want to have more of a feedback loop with direct users and advocates, would be like sort of size. What's a usable size of that? We have our own ideas about that, but we'd love to hear from you. I have in my neighborhood, the roller derby team practices in a basketball court. So it can happen in small spaces, but it could also be much grander than that. If you go to the park in Chicago that was recently built, and they have this ice skating rink that also serves as a roller skating venue that's quite large.
So to summarize, maybe we've looked at the park's topography as well as appropriateness of that type of activity, and identified a few places where that may provide for that kind of placement of higher energy sporting activity. We're looking at a potential pump track location along the kind of as an offshoot of a more longitudinal section of the park. We're definitely also trying to understand, kind of a conservation and preservation goals of the park as it comes to, quiet space, but also nature space. So trying to do as much as we can to splice kind of high energy activities together and protect, the speed differential that Scott was talking about. So as you saw a system of secondary trails that we've currently kind of studying the feasibility of. And I think as we start overlaying kind of a variety of speeds on those trails, we may actually kind of zoom in onto that idea and locate it more specifically.
And I'll jump in and add from the Conservancy standpoint, that's totally an option that we can get behind. And, just so everybody knows, we see the little inputs that are given to us in our, stakeholder meetings and our mapping. And sometimes it's hard to tell which ones are maybe the most popular. And so, that's when Natalia was talking about the prioritization exercise that we want to get the community to participate in, that's what's really going to help us. So, we can start including something like that and thinking, about where that can sit. And, from tonight's meeting, it's very clear we've got a lot of advocates for the skate park or beginner skating rink, at least here. The other thing that I think is really great about that is that a lot of people were mentioning was how that could leverage art, and certainly there's outdoor paints, you know, that could easily be applied to something like that, and it could be a rotating art program where every couple of years a new artist comes up with a design for that. So definitely within the range of possibilities for this plan.
And Scott touched a little bit on the question of where might that be located, which is a kind of serving for me, at least, as a segue into a little bit more of the question about the road reconfiguration around the Carter Center. And I think that that the skating question does not have to be tied to, I saw a comment that asked why it was tied to the road reconfiguration. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but yeah, like they mentioned, topography is an issue, and active versus passive space is also an issue. So definitely would be worth looking into where exactly that type of skate park could go. But moving on to the question of the road reconfiguration, we had a comment that expressed a little bit of concern about that contributing to maybe more traffic. So you're getting rid of traffic on the south side, but maybe you're adding more traffic to the north side. SWA, do y'all want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I'll just generally say that's a fair question. Obviously, we haven't done. It's not part of the scope of this portion of the master plan to do traffic studies and so forth, and that would be part of this feasibility. The feasibility study that would be the next step in that sort of process. In general, though, the circulation. It would just basically be how much more traffic volume are you moving up to that portion? The one advantage is that at least for a portion of that leg, is actually the road is down kind of low, especially as you're getting up closer to the intersection. So some of that traffic will be buffered, so to speak, by the topography where we have the bridge that crosses over. So that helps. But yeah, essentially that's going to ultimately define how much traffic, how many cars per hour, and what times a day we would be moving. And I think that's part of the discussion that would need to take place before something like that officially gets pursued. We floated this idea in front of GDOT very quickly, and they didn't kick us out of the room. So I think that's as far as we can say we've gotten it so far.
And I think if I'm not frozen, okay, I don't think I am. Another concern was that maybe that would entail some type of additional road and additional asphalt. From my understanding, it's already 2 lanes in each direction for that leg of the park.
Actually, on the north side, each one is 1 lane in each direction.
Okay.
So in order to do that, you would need to add a little bit more paving width to that northern leg to accommodate traffic. But again, I don't think that's still, if you think about a street, a lot of these things, these ideas are paired with other considerations like the design speed of the road. And that has to do with how much traffic and how many cars need to be moved through at what times. So the goal would be, I think, from our perspective, at least going into it, would be to make the road as narrow as it needs to be, and also pair that with slowing traffic, keeping the traffic speed down to the extent that we think is reasonable, while still maintaining whatever sort of traffic flow needs to happen for just circulation through the community.
And I will say that the north leg of that road that is one way is a lot shorter than the south leg of the road. So, if you think about, if we did pursue this, again, another item that we are looking to the public to help us decide, is this, a priority? But if we did that, the road beds on the south side could be reduced. And so you could take away more impervious on the south, even if you added some to the north. And you know, it's like the part of the green space there that you'd be extending into for that road bed is really the landscape buffer between the Carter Center parking and the roadway. So not space that's necessarily occupied by park users at the moment. So, you know, it would require a lot of study, but it's an idea that, you know, that road, we believe it was really a remnant of kind of some of the highway routing and planning that happened, and really makes the Carter Center an island. And so if there's interest in, you know, making that more porous, that's the best way we would probably do that. I did want to say, somebody asked if SWA, if you guys could introduce yourselves. I think we skipped that part. So SWA is the you know, landscape master planning firm that we are working with.
Yeah, and I'm Scott McCready. I'm a principal here with SWA Group.
And I'm Natalia Beard, principal at the SWA Group in the Houston office.
Yeah, so.
And I'm Kinder. I'm the managing principal of our Houston office.
And I'm Ed Cadell. I am with Sycamore Consulting. We're kind of leading the public involvement efforts, and the website, if you got to interact with that was us. Sorry for that misstep and procedure there. Okay, I guess we can move on to a next question. There was a comment from Joshua who mentioned that a dog park is needed in the Inman Park portion. There are tons of dogs already off leash from the neighborhood in this leg from the MARTA station. SWA, have y'all looked into possible dog parks? And
yeah, I
speak to that.
Sure. I think some people love dog parks, some people don't, and they are a management issue for whomever ultimately manages it. So whether it be the city of Atlanta or Freedom Park Conservancy moving forward. So that's sort of priority number one. They can take different manifestations too. They could be a big off-leashing dog park, in which case that's kind of a maintenance issue. They get muddy real quickly and so forth because they're very popular. The other version of that, which you might see if you say you went into places in New York or within parks, you'll see what it basically amounts to a dog run, an off-leash fenced in smaller area. Maybe it has synthetic turf or some other sort of easier maintainable area. And I think the thing to remember about dog parks is that they are as much about people as they are about dogs, right? It's just like when you have kids in playground, it's an opportunity for dog owners to get the dogs off the leash and talk to an adult and, you know, generally be a part of the community. So that item, as I remember, Natalia, I don't think it surfaced for the Inman Park here.
Yeah, in the comments that we've seen applied to the map, but also freeform in the survey, we primarily saw dog park related comments as they pertain to Kendall Park area. In general. Inman Park, for the most part, was, you know, protective of the kind of a passive nature, arboreal nature of the neighborhood, and you know, not, at least from what we saw, you know, displayed on the map, not particularly interested in more active uses that would require new infrastructure.
Yeah, so I think the good news is that they're flexible in how they get cited and all that. So it's something that certainly could be explored more if between the Conservancy and this public sort of comment section, we could understand sort of how much interest there is in that. Then it's certainly something that could be integrated.
Thank you, Scott and Natalia. I do want to throw another question to you and to the Conservancy. That's pretty basic to any of these ideas becoming a reality. So there's the basic question of how is this all funded? Would would y'all or would Stephanie like
Yeah.
to speak to that?
Yeah, so, and I kind of made a really quick reply in the chat if anybody saw it, but none of, or nearly none of this is funded, right? So what we want to use this document as is a guiding document for us to prioritize projects, so that then we can say, all right, we really want to make X project happen first. So then we can take that and go out and try to fundraise. And so we would be fundraising, partially on our own. We might also partner with different organizations like Trees Atlanta that we mentioned, to help fund something, and we'd be funding the design, the installation, and the maintenance. So I think a lot of us know that the city, Department of Parks and Recreation has limited resources, right? And so for things like meadow installations, it's not something they really have the capability to maintain. So it's really important that as we think about future projects, we're also fundraising for the maintenance. Otherwise, really great installations can get ruined quickly.
Stephanie, I would just add to what you said, which was spot on. But everyone needs to think too that this park has been around for a while, and it's going to be around for a lot longer. So these kinds of plans, they're looking at a 50-year horizon. There's things that you want to do right away. You want to do as many as you can, but the goal is to set this park on a long-term path of success, and that's looking way out as well as short-term.
We have a couple of other questions that came in through the Q&A box. Terry asked, have we identified any opportunities for restaurants, cafes, or retail to reorient towards the Freedom Park itself and the Freedom Park Trail?
Yeah, I think restaurants are really important for the functioning of any park, big park in particular, for a host of obvious reasons. And because Freedom Park, the way it's currently designated with its restrictions, you couldn't just build a restaurant in the middle of the park, which other places you can. And maybe in the future you can, but that's not sort of on the agenda at this stage. So the shorter answer is absolutely yes. There's probably some that are probably lower hanging fruit than others. We certainly think that's a really fundamental, and it relates not only to just like, is there a patio or a doorway that immediately fronts it, but it also relates to things like signage and that cultural trail that Natalia talked about earlier, these sort of path networks that extend out into the various communities. That are the way we'd like to think of this park in the future, is that those trails are as much a part of the park. And I think obviously that's to the degree that these neighborhoods want that to happen, but that's an opportunity to really, just as you're walking through the park, you're also walking through a really important little commercial portion of a neighborhood. You're highlighting some of the businesses there. There could even be more formal arrangements with those businesses that tie them more closely to the park at their discretion. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there, and so that's the long answer to your short
so I
question.
think there are two basic approaches. One is the front porch approach for the places that are already on the park or facing the park, and the second one is wayfinding. That we're really trying to tie these assets in the community back to the park via a system of pedestrian loops that will be themed. So you could have art walks, you could have culinary walks, you can have all kinds of kind of thematic overlays on these, so that people can really experience through a variety of senses, not just recreating in the park, but also partaking in the food culture of Atlanta. So it's a great question. And the third layer, the assembly spaces that we talked about earlier is a potential for gathering, with temporary food stalls and, market-like or food trucks.
Well, and then here we are in the 21st century too. We also have these phone devices in a lot of people's pocket anyways. So there's certainly an opportunity when we talk about signage and wayfinding, we're actually talking about two things: that the physical things you see in the pictures, signs, and then you also have apps, and that's definitely something that we're talking with the Conservancy about developing. That could be paired with the city or with other organizations, links and so forth. Whatever the right platform is, I think that's a big part of kind of establishing this legible and convenient relationship, so that when you're in the park, you know not only what places you can go, but how close they are. And maybe it's curated more towards the park and not just like Yelp or one of these more general apps. So there's different ways it could be approached. But anyways, I think that will make a much richer experience.
That's a great idea. I like the making use of this crazy computer we have in our pockets. One smaller question, I say that tentatively. Terry also asked what kind of lighting and or security upgrades are envisioned. And I know that lighting is a very context sensitive subject. I don't know if would y'all like to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and you said it, it's context sensitive. I think we don't, obviously there's so many layers to this park. We can't talk about everything tonight, but that's one that's certainly going to be part of this master plan. And it's actually one that we haven't really gotten into too much depth yet with the Conservancy yet. But I would say that probably the most fundamental thing is that the primary trails, being the hike and bike trails that more or less exist through the park, and many of which are already illuminated, with the exception of past Moreland, where they I think that's the only area where they cease to be lit. So our current idea is that you would have a safe way to move through the park, and that would be the safe way that you move. That remains lighting. So that's like your baseline condition. I think the whole area east of Moreland out to through Druid Hills, that sort of portion, that's a bigger question, because that is a much more off the grid sort of portion of the park. It's much more about nature and all this. So introducing light, there's a lot of homes that sort of look out onto that land. So that would be a discussion whether or not that receives full-time illumination along its primary trail. And then after that, you would have secondary paths and things like that, which maybe don't get as much light. I think the key things here is that if you're inviting people if you illuminate something, you're inviting somebody into the park, and therefore you have a responsibility to make sure that they're safe in that whole journey. So that's a kind of a combination between lighting. It's about sort of how visible those segments are based off topography and vegetation, and also really having a conversation with law enforcement and other sort of ways to just eyes on the park, how much visible it is from other users. These are all things that are really important to public safety. But we think nighttime access is important. It's going to happen regardless. And so we would want to build off of what's there and kind of extend out. And then there's other opportunities, lighting as it relates to art and other sort of moments that can be added on to that.
Great, thank you so much. Could you put the slide with the website and our email address back up? And I'll copy both of these into the chat window for convenience's sake. And as Natalia mentioned, kind of the next interactive kind of portion of this process that we're really looking at is they have established kind of a list of different like kind of time frames. So there's some things that might be a little bit more immediate that can be done with little to no resistance or little dollars. as well, compared to the more big long-term kind of ideas. So we're working on kind of like a prioritization exercise to see like what the community really wants in both of these kind of general lanes of visions of the future. And to answer Ellen's question, will the master plan drawings be on the website so we can look more closely? Yes, we will be posting. So the correct me if I'm wrong, SWA, but we're in the process of kind of finalizing a lot of these things. But the slides from the presentation, as well as the video of the presentation itself, will both be posted very soon, and documents as they emerge will definitely be available for closer scrutiny.
Yeah, and we also at Full-Ed realized that, you know, people wanting to spend time with their families over the holidays. So the way we are kind of looking at the time frame for collecting feedback is starting early January is really ramping up that kind of feedback collection by providing specific survey as it relates to prioritization of projects. And so then the communities will have 4 or 5 weeks to participate in the survey after studying the presentation materials and kind of diving a little bit deeper into materials that we presented today. And over that same period of time, over a month of January into February, we'll be simultaneously developing some more detail of the master plan, you know, some specifics dealing with the types of planting, you know, we're proposing specifics dealing with types of kind of curatorial practices that may make sense for the park. So those are not, you know, those can happen in tandem. And so then hopefully, you know, the whole thing, you know, everything aligns, and early February, we wrap it up and present to the city of Atlanta for adoption.
Right. Well, let me see if I think that's it for questions. Thanks everyone for sticking around. I know we went over a little bit, but for things like this, more is often better than less. So with that, you've got our contact information. If any other questions come up, shoot us an email. Stay tuned to the website. We will be posting videos of the presentations as well as slides and further information as it becomes available. And yeah, thank you so much for attending, and have a safe and happy holidays. And we hope to speak with you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.